The Ghost of Silverlode, Part B. On Monday morning, Papa told Tom and me to come to the advocate office after we'd finished our morning chores and distribute some handbills for a livestock auction. When we arrived at the advocate office, Tom took one stack of handbills and put them in the basket of his bicycle to deliver in town. I took the other stack with the tack hammer and box of tacks to post on trees and on the light poles on Main Street. I met Seth Smith when I was about half done. He offered to help me. I told my Uncle Steve we were going to Silverlode tonight, Seth said. Why did you do that? I asked. Now the whole deal is off. He'll tell your mother and father, and they will tell the parents of all the other kids. I acted like I was angry, but I was really happy. I hadn't volunteered to go, but this would give Tom a good excuse not to not go. Uncle Steve gave me his word he won't tell a soul, Seth said. I just wanted him to know because he is interested in ghosts and ghost stories. Well, I thought to myself, if that is the case, it isn't even important enough to mention to Tom. That night, when Tom and I went up to our bedroom, I started to get undressed. What do you think you're doing? Tom asked. Going to bed, I said. Oh, no, you're not, Tom said. You are coming with me. You didn't hear me volunteer to go, I said as I pulled off one shoe. I'll need you as a witness in case the other kids back out, Tom said. Then take Swin as a witness, I said as I took off my other shoe. A slow smile came to Tom's lips, which suddenly broke into a big grin. Why not? He asked. I'll take you both, if Big Brother isn't afraid. I put my shoes back on, trying to think of some excuse for not going. Maybe I could pretend I was suddenly very sick. No, Tom was too smart for that. And if I said I was afraid to go, that would make me a coward. I was trapped. We had to wait until almost 9 o'clock before Swin came upstairs. Papa and Mama said he was old enough to stay up an hour later than Tom and me. Tom met him at the top of the stairs and brought him into our bedroom. We are going to Silverlode as soon as the curfew whistle blows, Tom said. I'm going to prove there's no such thing as a ghost. You must be crazy, Swin said and looked afraid. I'm not crazy, Tom said, but it looks as if us little grade school kids have more courage than you big academy fellows. Swin had to admit he was a coward or go after that. Tom removed the screen from our bedroom window, and we all shinnied down the elm tree. We went to our corral and waited in the bright moonlight. Parley was the first to arrive, then Sammy and Danny, followed by Seth. A few minutes later, Basil arrived. We all sneaked up alleys until we came to the town limits and the sign. We walked along the old road until we were at the corner of Whiskey Row, which used to be the main street of the mining camp, and Quarry Street. I looked around and began to shiver. The thrifty Mormons had torn down many of the wooden buildings to use the lumber for making barns and pens, but there were still several deserted buildings on Whiskey Row, and I could see old weather-beaten shacks on both sides of the canyon, and the entrance to several old mine tunnels, and the giant excavation of big mines now overgrown with weeds and underbrush. Tom led us up Quarry Street as if he was just taking us on a nice, safe hike. We had only gone a few steps when we heard a ghostly sound, and all of us except Tom stopped. He looked back over his shoulder. It was just an owl, he said. We continued on to the end of Quarry Street and started up a trail that led to Boot Hill. Go single file now, Tom ordered. We are safe as long as we stay on the path. Get off it and you might fall into an old mine shaft or tunnel or an old well. We were about halfway up the path leading to the cemetery when we heard a roaring flapping sound and saw what looked like 1,000 bats flying out of a hole by the side of the path. That was enough to make even Tom stop. Seth was the first to speak. Maybe they are vampire bats, he said. Stuttering, he was so scared. My Uncle Steve said vampire bats will attack a person and drink their blood. These are mine bats, Tom said. You don't see them attacking us, do you? Come on. Tom continued to lead us up the trail until we came to a place where the ground leveled out and we could see Boot Hill. In the eerie moonlight, I could see old, weather-beaten wooden grave markers and 2 big marble headstones almost as high as I was. I knew one of those marble headstones was over the grave of Mr. Tinker because Papa had showed it to us on our daylight trip to Silverlode. "Take a good look, fellas," Tom said casually. "You'd think he'd told us to look at a nice flower garden. You don't see any ghost, do you? I told you there was no such thing as a ghost." He had no sooner gotten the words out of his mouth when the ghost of Tinker came right up out of its grave behind its headstone. He was dressed in a white sheet just like a ghost is supposed to be. "Ooh," the ghost cried in a shrill, high voice. "It is so cold and dark in that grave." Then he saw us, and the most shrill and terrifying cackling laugh came from him I'd ever heard. My feet felt as if they were nailed to the ground, and my tongue suddenly got so big I couldn't even scream. I could feel the hair on my head standing as stiff as bristles on a hairbrush. I could hear all the other kids, except Tom, screaming with terror. They all took off, running lickety-split down the trail. Tom grabbed my arm and spun me around as the ghost started coming towards us. "Let's get out of here," he shouted as he gave me a push. My feet came loose from the ground and my tongue got small again. I let out a terrified scream and ran like 60 down the trail, with Tom behind me and the sound of that crazy, horrible, cackling laughter of the ghost in my ears. By the time Tom and I reached the corner of Corey Street and turned onto Whiskey Row, the other kids were a block in front of us. And who do you think was in the lead? My big brother Swin. I took out after them, and if I'd ever run that fast at the foot races at the country fair, I'd have won every prize. I thought the other kids would wait for us once when they reached the town limits of Aidenville, but they didn't. I learned the next day none of them stopped until they were safe in their own beds.